I woke up after major heart surgery, barely conscious, tubes everywhere. My daughter leaned in and whispered, "Dad, the house is sold. You're moving to a senior living facility. It's for your own good." She smiled like she'd done me a favor. I smiled too. My older son is an FBI special agent. 3 days later, he knocked on her door with a warrant. She dropped to her knees, trembling, sobbing, "Dad, no." Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harold Morgan. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in Alexandria, Virginia for the past 40 years. Spent 3 decades as a federal judge before hanging up my robe 5 years ago. I always believed that justice and family were the 2 pillars of a meaningful life. Turns out I was only half right. Let me tell you about my younger daughter, Lisa. Lisa Morgan Crawford, now, though she kept her maiden name hyphenated, like it was some kind of trophy. 34 years old, always been the charmer of the family. As a child, she'd wrap me around her little finger with those big eyes and that innocent smile. Piano recitals, honor roll certificates, college graduation where she gave that speech about integrity that made me cry, that Lisa is gone. I'm not sure when exactly she disappeared, but somewhere in the last 2 years, my daughter transformed into someone I barely recognize. Her husband, Jason Crawford, 37, slick as motor oil and twice as toxic. Former real estate agent, though he lost his license about 18 months ago for what he called professional disagreements. I called it fraud, but nobody asked my opinion. Jason has this way of smiling that never quite reaches his eyes. Everything about him screams calculation. The way he measures his words, the way he touches Lisa's shoulder when he wants her to stop talking, the way he looks at my house like he's mentally dividing up the rooms. I started noticing the changes about 2 years back. Lisa's visits became shorter, more functional. Less, "Hi, Dad, how are you?" and more, "Dad, we need to talk about your finances." Jason would stand behind her, that empty smile plastered on his face, nodding along like a bobblehead. They'd drop hints about retirement communities, about how big my house was for one person, about how I should think about the future. I'm a federal judge, not senile. I knew exactly what they were thinking about. The chess tournaments kept me sharp. Every other weekend I'd drive to Richmond or DC, compete against people half my age, and usually place in the top 5. My orchids thrived on the sun porch, 37 varieties requiring precise care and attention. My collection of historical legal documents grew steadily. My mind was as clear as it had been at 40. But Lisa and Jason, they looked at me like I was already fading, like I was some confused old man who couldn't remember where he put his keys. The disrespect started subtle, interrupted sentences, exchanged glances when I spoke. Jason once actually patted my hand and said, "It's okay, Harold, we'll handle it," when I was explaining a perfectly coherent point about property law. The morning of March 3rd started like any other hospital morning, which is to say it started terribly. I'd gone in for heart surgery 2 days prior. "Triple bypass," the surgeon said. "Routine," he said. I woke up feeling like someone had used my chest as a practice field for demolition derby. Tubes everywhere, machines beeping, that distinctive hospital smell of disinfectant and despair. Lisa was sitting beside my bed when I opened my eyes. She was alone, no Jason for once, and she had this concerned expression painted on her face, the caring daughter, the devoted child. I'd seen that look before, in courtrooms, on defendants who thought they could convince me they were innocent. "Dad," she said softly, reaching for my hand, "you're awake." "How do you feel?" My throat was dry, like I got hit by a truck. "Where's Robert?" My older son, Robert, 42. FBI, special agent. He'd promised to be here. "He's working a case. Washington. He'll visit tomorrow." She squeezed my hand. "Dad, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, I thought. The pitch, the angle, whatever scheme she'd been cooking up. "I've been handling things while you were under," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Going through your papers, making sure everything's taken care of. And Dad, I found something troubling. Your medical bills are going to be enormous. The surgery alone is over $200,000. And with your medications, the recovery care. I have insurance, Lisa. Federal Employee Health Benefits. They're excellent. My voice came out raspy, but firm. She nodded, that practiced sympathy still fixed on her face. I know, Dad, but there are gaps, co-pays, things insurance doesn't cover. I've been running the numbers, and it's overwhelming. She paused for a dramatic effect. I recognized the technique. I'd seen lawyers use it for 30 years, so I made a decision. For your own good. The machines beside me beeped steadily. I waited. I sold the house. The world seemed to tilt slightly. You what? The house on Royal Street. I sold it. We got $1.24 million for it. That's going to cover all your medical debts, Dad. All of them. You won't have to worry about anything. She smiled, like she'd just given me a gift. My house. The 3-story colonial I'd bought in 1987, where I'd raised both my children, where Mary and I had spent 28 years before she passed, where every corner held a memory, every room a piece of my life. I never authorized that. My voice was ice. I know it's a shock, but it's for the best. I've already arranged everything. You're moving to Sunny Meadows Senior Living next week. Beautiful place, Dad. Full care, activities, people your age. You'll love it. I don't have medical debts, I wanted to say. Insurance covers everything. But I didn't, because suddenly pieces were clicking together in my judge's mind. The way she'd been asking about my documents, the time she'd needed to borrow my Social Security card for insurance paperwork, the afternoon Jason had volunteered to organize my filing cabinet. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Colder than the anesthesia, colder than the hospital air. Interesting, I said quietly. Tell me, Lisa, did you forge the power of attorney yourself, or did Jason help you with that? The practiced sympathy cracked, just for a second. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating. Her hand jerked away from mine, and in that moment, I knew everything I needed to know. Lisa's laugh came out strangled, artificial. Dad, what are you talking about? You signed the power of attorney in January. Don't you remember? She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a document, her hands shaking slightly. Right here, notarized and everything. I took the paper, even though my chest screamed in protest at the movement. There it was. Power of attorney, dated January 15th, with my signature at the bottom. Notary seal. Official looking. Perfect forgery. January 15th, I repeated slowly. That's specific. You were having a good day. We met at that cafe you like, remember? You signed it there. Her voice gained confidence as she built her lie. You said you wanted someone to handle things if anything happened, that you trusted me. I nodded, handing the document back. My face remained neutral, years of judicial training keeping my expression blank. Of course, the cafe. I remember now. The relief on her face was almost pathetic. Good. Good, Dad. I was worried you'd forgotten. The doctors said some memory issues are normal after surgery. Memory issues? I echoed. Right. She stayed another 20 minutes, chattering about Sunny Meadows, about how she'd already started packing my belongings, about how this was all for my own good. I let her talk. 30 years on the bench taught me when to listen and when to speak. This was a listening moment. When she finally left, promising to return the next day with more details, I waited exactly 5 minutes. Then I reached for the phone beside my bed. I remembered January 15th with perfect clarity. I remembered it because I'd spent that day in Richmond at the Virginia State Chess Championship. I'd placed third out of 200 competitors. There were photographs, video recordings, 47 witnesses who'd watched me play for 8 straight hours. I couldn't have been at any cafe in Alexandria. I couldn't have signed anything. My daughter had just committed federal fraud. The phone rang twice before my son answered. Dad, how are you feeling? Robert, I said quietly, I need to tell you something about your sister. I'd raised both my children on the same principles: justice, integrity, respect for the law. Robert had absorbed those lessons like a sponge. He'd gone to law school, joined the FBI, specialized in financial crimes and document fraud. He was brilliant, methodical, and absolutely relentless when he caught a scent. Lisa had apparently learned different lessons. She'd learned how to lie with conviction, how to manipulate emotions, how to see people as opportunities rather than relationships. I wondered when that happened. When did my little girl, the one who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, turn into this? I remembered her at 8 years old, standing in my study with tears streaming down her face. I took the money, Daddy, the $20 from your desk. I'm sorry. She'd been so scared of disappointing me. I'd hugged her, told her everyone makes mistakes, helped her understand why honesty mattered. She'd repaid the money from her allowance, $1 at a time. That child would have never forged my signature. That child would have come to me if she needed help. But that child was gone. In her place was a woman who saw her father recovering from heart surgery and thought, opportunity. I told Robert everything. The alleged sale, the power of attorney, the January 15th date. He listened without interrupting, and I could practically hear his FBI brain cataloging evidence, building a case. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, forged notarization of federal documents and real estate fraud, wire fraud if they transferred money across state lines. If they used any digital means to facilitate the sale, we can add electronic fraud. His voice was completely flat, emotionless. Dad, these are serious charges. I know. Federal prison's serious. I know that too, son. Another pause. Do you want me to handle this? Did I? Lisa was my daughter, my child. Every instinct screamed to protect her, to fix this somehow, to find a way to make her understand without destroying her life. But she'd looked me in the eye in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery, and lied. She'd stolen my home. She'd forged my name. She'd planned to warehouse me in some facility while she spent my money. She'd counted on me being weak, confused, helpless. She'd forgotten who I was. Yes, I said. Handle it. Understood. I'll make some calls. Pull the documentation. We'll need the original power of attorney, the sales contract, everything. I'll need you to write down exactly what happened, what she said. Can you do that? Robert, I spent 30 years documenting testimony. I can handle it. A ghost of warmth entered his voice. I know, Dad. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow with an update. He hesitated. I'm sorry. About Lisa. Me too, son. Me too. I hung up and stared at the ceiling tiles. Somewhere in this hospital, monitors beeped. Nurses made rounds. Patients recovered or didn't. Life continued its messy, complicated march forward. My youngest daughter had just tried to steal my life from me. My oldest son was going to arrest her for it. I thought about justice. Real justice, not the sanitized courtroom version. Justice that hurt. Justice that cost. I'd built a career on it. 30 years of sentences, verdicts, consequences. I'd always believed that everyone deserved their day in court, that the system worked, that truth prevailed. Now it was my turn to prove it. 3 days? I thought. Robert said he'd need 3 days to gather everything, coordinate with the local office, prepare the case. 3 days until my daughter discovered that some lessons are learned too late. I settled back against the pillows, my chest aching but my mind clear, crystal clear. Outside my window, Alexandria stretched toward the Potomac. All those perfect streets with their perfect houses full of imperfect people. Lisa and Jason were out there somewhere, probably celebrating their successful con, probably spending my money in their minds, planning their escape. They had 3 days of freedom left. I intended to savor every second of their upcoming shock. 3 days later, early morning, I was still in the hospital when Robert called. It's done, he said simply. We're moving in 20 minutes. I looked at the clock beside my bed. 6:45. Lisa was probably still asleep, or maybe she and Jason were already awake, planning their day, planning their new life with my money. The warrant? I asked. Signed by Judge Morrison an hour ago. Arrest warrant, search warrant, asset seizure authorization. We've got everything we need. He paused. Dad, are you absolutely certain about this? I thought about that question. My daughter, my youngest child, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. Yes, I said, I'm certain. Understood. I'll call you after. The line went dead. I tried to imagine the scene. Lisa and Jason in their apartment on Duke Street, probably sitting at their breakfast table. Maybe Jason was checking their bank account for the 100th time, watching that $1.24 million sit there like a prize. Maybe Lisa was already browsing real estate in the Cayman Islands, picking out their escape destination. They thought they'd won. They thought the hard part was over. I spent the next 2 hours staring at the ceiling, running through everything I knew. The forged signature, the fake notarization, the carefully constructed lies. Every detail of their scheme played through my mind, like evidence being presented in court. When Robert finally called back, his voice was professionally neutral. Both subjects in custody. No incidents. They're being processed now. How did they react? A slight pause. Lisa dropped to her knees when I showed her the badge, started crying, begging. Jason tried to lawyer up immediately. Neither said anything incriminating, but their reactions spoke volumes. Another pause. The money's been frozen. Federal asset seizure. They won't be able to touch a penny. I closed my eyes. Good. Dad, I need to tell you something. The look on her face when she realized. He trailed off. She's my sister. This isn't easy. I know, son. But she did this. They both did. I know that too. After he hung up, I sat there processing. My daughter was in federal custody. Within hours, she'd be fingerprinted, photographed, processed, like any other criminal. Because that's what she was now. A criminal. Part of me expected to feel guilt. Regret? Something other than this cold satisfaction. But 30 years on the bench taught me something valuable. Justice doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care if the defendant is your daughter or a stranger. The law is the law, and they'd broken it spectacularly. A nurse came in to check my vitals, and I must have looked different somehow, because she asked if I was feeling all right. Better than I have in days, I told her. And it was true. 2 days later, I was discharged. My son-in-law's mother, a woman I'd met exactly twice, had the unfortunate task of driving me home. Robert was tied up with the case, and I wasn't about to call Lisa. The house on Royal Street looked exactly as I'd left it. 3 stories of red brick, black shutters, the maple tree in front just starting to bud. My home for 38 years. The place Lisa had tried to steal. Inside, everything was untouched. My orchids still lined the sun porch, though they needed water. My chess trophies sat on the mantel. My collection of legal documents filled the study shelves. All of it still mine. I stood in the foyer and felt something shift inside me. They'd counted on me being weak, confused, a helpless old man who wouldn't understand what was happening until it was too late. They'd forgotten I'd spent 3 decades outthinking criminals far more sophisticated than them. The next morning I had a visitor, Catherine Peterson, a civil attorney whose office was 3 blocks from the federal courthouse. I'd never met her before, but Robert had recommended her. She arrived at 10, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression I recognized from 1,000 courtrooms. All business. "Mr. Morgan," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've been briefed by your son on the criminal case. I'm here to discuss the civil implications." We sat in my study, and she laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. The house sale had been voided by the court. The buyer, a couple named Smith, turned out to be friends of Jason's. They'd planned to flip the house immediately, split the profits. The Smiths were now cooperating witnesses, trading information for immunity. "It gets more interesting," Catherine continued, pulling documents from her briefcase. "The FBI traced the money. Your daughter and son-in-law had already moved the funds through 3 separate accounts. Final destination, offshore banking in the Caymans. And we found airline tickets. They were planning to leave the country in 2 weeks. I absorbed this information without surprise. They were running. They were absolutely running. This wasn't some impulsive crime. They'd been planning it for months. She slid a paper across my desk. Bank statements. We subpoenaed Lisa's accounts. I studied the statements. Regular deposits from Jason's failed business ventures. Regular withdrawals for normal expenses. And then every month, like clockwork, $8,500 transferred to something called Royal Flush, LLC. "What's Royal Flush?" I asked. Catherine's expression darkened. "We're still investigating, but preliminary research suggests it's a shell company. The FBI is digging deeper." I stared at that line item. $8,500 every month for the past 2 years. That was over $200,000 total. Find out where that money went, I said quietly. Every penny. She nodded. Already on it. I have a forensic accountant reviewing everything. After Catherine left, I sat in my study and thought about patterns. In 30 years as a judge, I'd learned that financial crimes always follow patterns. Money leaves traces. Lies create more lies. And eventually, everything unravels. Lisa's $8,500 monthly payments weren't random. They were too consistent, too specific. She was paying someone something. The question was, what? I spent the rest of that day going through every document Catherine had provided. Bank statements, transaction records, email printouts the FBI had recovered. Somewhere in this mountain of evidence was the full story, and I was going to find it. That evening, Robert stopped by. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, suit jacket draped over his arm. Long day? I asked, pouring him a glass of water. You have no idea. He sank into my living room couch. Jason's parents posted bail. $500,000 each. Their entire retirement savings, basically. They believe their son. They want to believe him. Robert rubbed his eyes. His lawyer's already spinning this as a misunderstanding. They're going to claim you did sign the power of attorney, but forgot. Age-related memory issues. I smiled coldly. Let them try. Dad, they're going to come at you hard. They'll paint you as a confused old man who can't remember what he had for breakfast. They'll question your competency, your mental state, everything. Good. I met his eyes. I have video evidence of me winning 3rd place in a chess tournament, the day I supposedly signed their document. I have 47 witnesses who watched me play for 8 hours straight. I have tournament brackets, registration records, and a trophy. Let them explain that to a jury. Robert's tired expression cracked into something like pride. 30 years on the bench, you learned a few things. A few, I agreed. He stayed for dinner, and we talked about everything except Lisa, his kids, my grandchildren, his wife Sarah's new job, normal things, family things. But underneath it all, I could feel the weight of what was happening. My daughter in custody, her husband beside her, both of them facing federal charges that could mean decades in prison. They'd tried to steal my life. Now I was going to take theirs apart piece by piece, legally and methodically, until there was nothing left but consequences. The following morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Leon Wheeler, came recommended by Catherine Peterson, and charged $3,500 for a comprehensive background investigation. I need to know everything about my daughter's finances, I told him in my study, particularly those monthly payments to Royal Flush, LLC. Leon was in his 50s, former police detective, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen it all. He took notes in a small leather notebook, old school, no tablet or phone. How deep do you want me to go? He asked. As deep as it takes. He nodded. Understood. Give me a week. A week. 7 days to uncover whatever Lisa had been hiding. 7 days while she and Jason sat in their apartment under house arrest, wearing ankle monitors, waiting for their preliminary hearing. I spent those days doing my own research. I'd been a federal judge, not a criminal investigator, but I understood how to read documents, how to spot inconsistencies, how to follow logical trails. The house felt different now. Before, it had been my home, my sanctuary. Now it felt like a war room. My study became command central, covered in papers, timelines, evidence logs. I mapped out everything I knew: the forged power of attorney, the fake sale, the offshore accounts, the plane tickets, and those mysterious monthly payments. Catherine Peterson called midweek with an update. The FBI found something interesting in Jason's email. He'd been corresponding with the Smiths about the house purchase for 3 months. They were going to buy it, hold it for 60 days, then sell it back to Jason's cousin for a slightly higher price. The profit would be split 3 ways. Elaborate, I said. Very. They'd thought this through. Multiple layers, multiple transactions, all designed to obscure the money trail. If you'd actually been confused or incapacitated, they might have gotten away with it. But I'm not confused. No, Mr. Morgan, you're decidedly not confused. I could hear the smile in her voice, which is going to be their downfall. I thought about that after we hung up. They'd underestimated me so completely, seen my age, my recent surgery, and decided I was vulnerable. easy prey. The chess tournaments should have warned them. The legal document collection, the orchids that required precise care and attention, all signs of a mind that still worked perfectly well. But they'd seen what they wanted to see, an old man ripe for exploitation. On the sixth day, Leon Wheeler called. I found Royal Flush. And it's a front for an underground gambling operation in Maryland. High-stakes poker, blackjack, roulette. Illegal as they come. The owner is a guy named Victor Romano, and he's got a very interesting criminal history. My hand tightened on the phone. Gambling. Your daughter's been in deep for about 2 years. The payments you saw, those weren't for playing. Those were debt payments. She owes Romano somewhere north of $340,000. $340,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. How much? I asked, needing to hear it again. 340, give or take. And from what my sources tell me, Romano doesn't take kindly to unpaid debts. He's been putting pressure on her. Serious pressure. I leaned back in my chair, pieces clicking into place. Lisa needed money desperately. Not for luxury, not for greed, but because she was in debt to a criminal who was threatening her. So she decided to steal from her own father. Send me everything you have, I told Leon. Every document, every photo, every source. Already on its way. Mr. Morgan, this information could be valuable to the FBI. Romano's operation has been on their radar for years. I'll make sure they get it. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my study and felt something cold and final settle over me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This wasn't just about forged documents. My daughter had been desperate, had been in danger, and instead of coming to me, instead of asking for help, she decided I was the solution to her problem. Not as a father, but as a source of money. I could have helped her, could have found a legal way out of her mess, could have protected her, but she'd looked at me and seen only an opportunity to exploit. I called Robert and gave him everything Leon had found. Within hours, the FBI opened a parallel investigation into Victor Romano's operation. Within days, Romano was arrested on racketeering and illegal gambling charges. And Lisa? Lisa got another charge added to her list, financial transactions with a criminal organization. Jason's attempt to negotiate a plea deal fell apart when I made it clear through Catherine that I wanted full prosecution. Both of them. No deals, no reduced sentences, no cooperation agreements. They'd planned to steal my home, my life savings, and disappear to the Cayman Islands, while I rotted in some nursing home. Now they were going to learn what happens when you underestimate a federal judge. The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. Jason's expensive lawyer, a man named Marcus Wayne, who charged $75,000 just to take the case, was already building their defense strategy. They were going to claim I'd signed the power of attorney and forgotten, that my recent heart surgery had affected my memory, that I was a confused old man who didn't understand what was happening. I sat in my study that evening watching the sun set over Alexandria and smiled. Let them try. I had video evidence, witness testimony, medical records showing perfect cognitive function, and a trophy from a chess tournament I'd won, while supposedly signing their forged document. But more than that, I had something they'd never expected. I had the patience and knowledge to dismantle their lives completely, legally, and without mercy. I'd spent 30 years watching criminals try to outsmart the system, watching them lie, manipulate, forge, and scheme. And I'd spent 30 years watching them fail. Lisa and Jason were about to learn that some lessons are only taught once, and they're taught harshly. I watered my orchids, each one requiring specific care and attention. Precision, patience, long-term planning. The same skills that made me a good judge. The same skills I was going to use to ensure my daughter and her husband faced every single consequence of their choices. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days until I sat across from Lisa in a courtroom and watched her defense crumble. I was ready. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold morning, one of those gray days where the sky seemed to press down on Alexandria like a weight. I dressed carefully that morning, a dark suit I'd worn countless times on the bench, conservative tie, polished shoes, armor for a different kind of battle. Catherine Peterson met me outside the federal courthouse. her expression all business. They posted bail yesterday. Jason's parents mortgaged their house, $500,000 each. $1 million total, I said quietly. They must really believe their son. Or they're desperate to believe him. She adjusted her briefcase. Their lawyer is Marcus Wayne. Very expensive, very aggressive. Charges $75,000 just to take a case like this. I know Marcus. Defended a white-collar case in my courtroom about 8 years ago. He's good, but he relies on emotional manipulation and doubt. I met her eyes. He won't find any doubt here. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than the ones I'd presided over, but the atmosphere was identical. That particular tension that comes before legal combat. The bailiff stood ready, the court reporter prepared her machine, and spectators filed into the gallery. Lisa and Jason entered with their lawyer. I studied them with the clinical detachment I'd cultivated over 30 years. Lisa wore a conservative blue dress, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the picture of a concerned, devoted daughter. Jason had on a gray suit, his expression carefully neutral, though I noticed his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Marcus Wayne was exactly as I remembered. Mid-50s, silver hair styled perfectly, expensive suit, and that particular brand of confidence that came from winning cases through sheer force of personality. Lisa's eyes found mine across the courtroom. For a moment our gazes locked, and I saw something flicker there. Fear, maybe, or calculation, hard to tell anymore. The judge entered, and we all stood. Judge Morrison, a woman I'd worked with for over a decade before my retirement. Sharp, no nonsense, impossible to manipulate. Marcus Wayne's usual tactics wouldn't work on her. The proceedings began with the prosecution laying out the charges. Federal document forgery, real estate fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. Each count recited in that flat, official tone that made everything sound inevitable. Then Marcus Wayne stood for the defense, and I watched him deploy his strategy with the precision of a surgeon. Your Honor, my clients are the victims of a terrible misunderstanding. Mr. Harold Morgan is a respected former judge. Yes, but he's also a 68-year-old man who recently underwent serious heart surgery. He gestured toward me with practiced sympathy. The medical reality is that such procedures can affect cognitive function, particularly short-term memory. I kept my expression blank. Let him dig his hole deeper. We have documentation here from Dr. Richard Pemberton, a neurologist, suggesting that Mr. Morgan may indeed have signed the power of attorney, but subsequently forgotten, due to post-surgical cognitive impairment. He produced papers with a flourish. This isn't fraud, Your Honor. This is a family tragedy involving a confused father and children trying to help him. The words hung in the air like smoke. Confused father. It took every ounce of judicial training not to react. Catherine stood smoothly. Your Honor, the defense's theory requires the court to believe that Mr. Morgan signed this document, but then completely forgot about it, despite his memory being clear on every other aspect of his life. She opened her own briefcase. I'd like to present evidence to the contrary. What followed was beautiful in its precision. Catherine presented my medical records from the hospital. Cognitive function tests performed post-surgery. Every single one showing normal results. No memory impairment, no confusion, no indication of any mental decline. Furthermore, Your Honor, Catherine continued, the power of attorney is dated the 15th of last month. On that exact date, Mr. Morgan was in Richmond, Virginia, competing in the state chess championship. She produced documents like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. Tournament registration, video footage of Mr. Morgan playing 8 consecutive matches, testimony from 47 witnesses, and most relevantly, this trophy for placing 3rd out of 200 competitors. The trophy appeared on the prosecution's table. 3rd place, state championship, my name engraved on the base. I watched Marcus Wayne's confidence crack, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes. A man with cognitive impairment, Catherine said quietly, does not place 3rd in a state chess championship requiring sustained concentration for 8 hours straight. Judge Morrison looked over her glasses at the defense table. Mr. Wayne, do you have a response to this evidence? Marcus recovered quickly. I'd give him that. Your Honor, we maintain that Mr. Morgan may have signed the document on a different day and simply misremembered the date. post-surgical confusion. Counsel, Judge Morrison interrupted, her tone sharp. The document is dated and notarized for a specific day, a day when the alleged signatory was provably elsewhere, engaged in activities requiring exceptional mental acuity. I'm disinclined to accept the confusion argument. I saw Jason whisper urgently to Marcus. Lisa's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles had gone white. The hearing continued for another hour, but the outcome was already determined. Judge Morrison denied the motion to dismiss, set a trial date, and imposed strict conditions on Lisa and Jason's bail: ankle monitors, travel restrictions, regular check-ins with pretrial services. As the court adjourned, I stood and gathered my coat. Lisa and Jason were conferring with Marcus near the defense table, their voices low and urgent. I walked past them slowly, deliberately. As I passed Lisa, I leaned in just slightly, just enough for her to hear. You always were a terrible liar, Lisa. Remember when you were 8 and took $20 from my desk drawer? You had that same look on your face then. The color drained from her face like water from a tub. Her eyes went wide, and for a second I saw the little girl who'd confessed through tears, promised to be better. But that little girl was gone. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. 2 weeks after the hearing, I was sitting in my study when Catherine called with an update. The forensic accountant finished going through Lisa's financial records. You need to see this. She arrived within the hour, spreading documents across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, transaction records, payment histories. 2 years of financial activity laid bare. The $8,500 monthly payments, she said, pointing to highlighted entries, they all went to the same place, a shell company called Royal Flush LLC. I studied the pattern. Like clockwork, every month $8,500 vanished from Lisa's account. What is Royal Flush? Catherine's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. Royal Flush is a front for an illegal gambling operation in Maryland. High-stakes poker, blackjack, roulette, the works. The pieces clicked into place with almost audible precision. Lisa has a gambling problem, had a gambling problem, has a massive gambling debt. Catherine pulled out another document. According to the investigator I hired, she owes the operation's owner approximately $340,000. $340,000? The number sat in my chest like lead. The owner, Catherine continued, is a man named Victor Romano. He has a very colorful criminal history. Racketeering, illegal gambling operations, intimidation. He's been on the FBI's radar for years, but always managed to slip away. I sat back in my chair, processing. Lisa hadn't tried to steal my house because of greed. She'd done it because she was desperate, because someone like Victor Romano was threatening her. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something like sympathy. Then I remembered her looking me in the eye in that hospital bed in line. Remembered her forged signature on documents. Remembered her plan to warehouse me in a nursing home while she fled the country with my money. Desperation didn't excuse betrayal. I need you to compile everything you have on Romano and this gambling operation, I said. Every transaction, every payment, every piece of evidence. What are you planning? I'm going to give it to Robert. Let the FBI handle Mr. Romano. I met her eyes. And let Lisa explain to a federal prosecutor why she's been making regular payments to an illegal gambling operation run by a known criminal. Catherine smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. That's going to add additional charges. Financial transactions with a criminal organization. Yes, I said simply. It will. That evening I called Robert and laid out everything we'd discovered. He listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing, taking notes. Romano, he said when I finished. Victor Romano. We've been trying to build a case against him for 3 years. If Lisa's been making documented payments to his organization, that gives us grounds for a deeper investigation. How deep? Deep enough to shut him down, freeze his assets, raid his properties, arrest everyone in the chain. It'll take a few weeks to coordinate, but we can do it. Do it, I said. The next weeks passed in a strange mixture of routine and anticipation. I tended my orchids, played chess online, read legal journals. Normal life, except for the undercurrent of waiting. Then on a Tuesday morning, Robert called. Romano's in custody. We raided 3 of his locations simultaneously this morning. seized over $2 million in cash, shut down the gambling operation, arrested 17 people. It's done. And Lisa? Her payments to Romano's organization? That's now evidence in a federal racketeering case. The prosecutor is adding charges of conducting financial transactions with a criminal enterprise. I closed my eyes. My daughter, who'd once cried over stealing $20, was now facing charges of involvement with organized crime. There's something else, Robert said, his voice quieter. Jason's trying to make a deal. He approached the prosecutor yesterday. He's offering to testify against Lisa in exchange for a reduced sentence. The betrayal was almost poetic. Partners in crime until the consequences became real. Then every man for himself. What did the prosecutor say? He called me to ask what you wanted. I stood at my study window, looking out at Royal Street. The maple tree in front of my house was in full bloom now, green leaves bright against the gray spring sky. No deal, I said. They planned this together. They executed it together. They can face the consequences together. Understood. I'll let the prosecutor know. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in my reading chair. The house was quiet around me, peaceful. Lisa and Jason had thought they were clever. Thought they'd found an easy mark in a confused old man recovering from surgery. They'd forged documents, created shell companies, planned their escape route down to the last detail. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I'd spent 30 years watching criminals try to outsmart the system. I'd seen every scheme, every lie, every desperate attempt to avoid consequences, and I'd watched them all fail. The preliminary hearing had been just the opening move. The gambling operation shutdown was the second strike. Now Lisa was facing not just fraud charges, but connections to organized crime. Jason was trying to betray her to save himself. Their perfect plan was unraveling thread by thread, and I was just getting started. I thought about the old legal principle. Justice delayed is justice denied. But there was another truth I'd learned over 3 decades on the bench. Justice, when it finally arrives, is so much sweeter for the waiting. My daughter would learn that lesson soon enough. Both of them would. 3 weeks later, Robert called with news that changed everything. Dad, we found something. Something big. I was in my study, organizing my legal document collection. I set down the 19th century land deed I'd been examining. I'm listening. The FBI has been digging through Jason's business records, real estate transactions going back 5 years. We found a pattern. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling. Dad, you weren't their first target. You weren't even their second. The words settled over me like cold water. Explain. 2 years ago, Jason was still working as a licensed real estate agent. He helped an elderly widow named Dorothy Miller sell her house. She was 73, recently lost her husband, had early-stage dementia. Jason convinced her to sell for way below market value. Listed at $300,000, actual value was closer to $500,000. He pocketed $85,000 in commission and fees. I closed my eyes. Where is Dorothy now? Dead. Died in a nursing home 6 months after the sale. Her children tried to investigate, filed a complaint, but Jason had covered his tracks well. Until now, Robert's voice hardened. We matched the pattern to 4 other cases. Same scheme, same tactics. Target elderly people, especially those recently widowed or showing signs of cognitive decline. Manipulate them into selling cheap. Take massive cuts, move on. Total amount? $1.67 million, give or take, not counting what they tried to take from you. I sat in silence, processing. My daughter and her husband hadn't just betrayed me. They'd made a business out of preying on vulnerable elderly people. People like Dorothy Miller, who'd lost her husband and then lost her home, dying without ever knowing she'd been robbed. The federal prosecutor is filing additional charges, Robert continued. Pattern of fraud, elder abuse, racketeering, 23 counts total. This isn't just about you anymore, Dad. This is about stopping predators who've been operating for years. When do you need me to testify? Next week. The full trial starts in 10 days. The courtroom was packed when I took the stand. Different from the preliminary hearing, this was the main event. Reporters in the gallery, sketch artists frantically drawing, every seat filled with spectators hungry for drama. Lisa and Jason sat at the defense table, and I studied them as I was sworn in. Lisa looked thinner, hollowed out by stress. Jason's jaw was tight, his hands clasped on the table. Marcus Wayne sat between them, probably regretting his $75,000 fee. The prosecutor was a woman named Amanda Chen, federal prosecutor for the Eastern District of Virginia. Sharp, precise, with the kind of relentless efficiency I'd always appreciated in my own courtroom. "Mr. Morgan," she began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendants." I looked directly at Lisa as I spoke. "Lisa Morgan Crawford is my younger daughter. Jason Crawford is her husband. I raised Lisa to understand the difference between right and wrong, to value honesty and integrity above all else." I paused. Apparently, those lessons didn't take. Lisa flinched. Marcus Wayne started to object, but Amanda cut him off smoothly. "Mr. Morgan, in your professional capacity as a federal judge for 30 years, how many fraud cases did you oversee?" "Hundreds. Perhaps over 1,000, counting all the preliminary hearings and motions. And in your professional opinion, based on the evidence presented in this case, does the defendant's scheme show signs of premeditation and pattern?" I nodded. "Absolutely. This wasn't a one-time mistake or moment of desperation. This was a carefully planned, repeatedly executed criminal enterprise. They selected vulnerable targets, exploited trust, forged documents, and attempted to flee the country when caught. That's not desperation. That's predatory behavior." Marcus Wayne stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is characterizing—" "Overruled," Judge Morrison said crisply. "Mr. Morgan's professional experience is relevant. Continue, Ms. Chen." Amanda walked me through the timeline. The forged power of attorney, the fake sale, the offshore accounts, the plane tickets to the Cayman Islands. Each piece of evidence laid out with methodical precision. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mr. Morgan, the defense has argued that your daughter was desperate, driven by gambling debts and fear. Do you have any sympathy for that position?" I looked at Lisa, really looked at her. For a moment I saw the 8-year-old who'd confessed through tears about the $20. Then I saw the woman who'd sat beside my hospital bed and lied to my face. "I have sympathy for anyone trapped by addiction," I said slowly. "But sympathy doesn't excuse criminality. If Lisa had come to me, if she'd asked for help, I would have found a legal solution. I spent 30 years helping people navigate complex legal problems. I could have helped my own daughter." I paused. "But she didn't see me as her father. She saw me as a mark, an elderly target, vulnerable after surgery, easy to manipulate. She made a choice, and choices have consequences." The words hung in the courtroom like smoke. "One final question, Mr. Morgan. Do you regret pursuing charges against your own daughter?" I met Lisa's eyes across the courtroom. She was crying, tears streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. Just that cold clarity I'd cultivated for 3 decades on the bench. "I regret the daughter I raised is gone," I said. "I regret that the woman sitting there made the choices she made. But I don't regret ensuring she faces justice. Justice doesn't make exceptions for family. If it did, it wouldn't be justice." When I stepped down from the witness stand, I walked past the defense table without looking at Lisa. I'd said everything that needed saying. The rest of the trial proceeded like clockwork. Amanda Chen presented witness after witness. Dorothy Miller's children, tearful and angry, describing how their mother had been confused, manipulated, robbed. 3 other victims, or their families, each with similar stories. Financial experts tracking the money through its elaborate laundering scheme. FBI agents detailing the pattern of predatory behavior. And then the bombshell, the notary who'd supposedly certified my signature. She took the stand, a nervous woman in her 40s named Patricia Holmes. Under oath, she testified that Jason had approached her 6 months ago, offering $15,000 to forge notary documents. She'd refused, threatened to report him. "So Jason found someone else," Amanda said. "Someone willing to break the law." The FBI had found that someone. A professional forger named Stephen Blake, currently serving time for unrelated charges. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he'd provided everything. Emails from Jason, payment records, even the fake notary stamp he'd created. I watched Marcus Wayne's defense crumble in real time. His confident demeanor evaporated. His objections became desperate, grasping. He tried to argue entrapment, coercion, unreliable witnesses. Judge Morrison shut him down at every turn. Jason and Lisa whispered urgently to each other during breaks, their body language screaming panic. Jason's parents sat in the gallery, faces gray with shock, probably realizing their $1 million bail money was as good as gone. On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor rested her case. Marcus Wayne presented his defense, which amounted to Lisa crying on the stand, claiming she'd been desperate, afraid, manipulated by Jason. Jason, in turn, claimed he'd been trying to help Lisa, that he hadn't known the power of attorney was forged, that everything had spiraled out of control. They were turning on each other, exactly as I'd known they would. Predators always do when cornered. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty, on all 23 counts. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. I sat in the gallery this time, not testifying, just observing. Robert sat beside me, his expression professionally neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Judge Morrison reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, her expression growing grimmer with each page. Finally, she looked up at Lisa and Jason, standing before her like condemned prisoners. "In 30 years on the bench," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I have seen many criminals, some driven by poverty, some by addiction, some by pure greed. But cases like this, where defendants systematically prey on the elderly, on the vulnerable, on those who should be able to trust them, these cases represent a particular kind of evil." Lisa was crying. Jason stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Lisa Morgan Crawford," Judge Morrison continued, "you targeted your own father, a man recovering from heart surgery. You forged his signature, sold his home, and planned to flee the country with his money while warehousing him in a nursing facility. The betrayal is almost incomprehensible." She turned to Jason. "And you, Mr. Crawford, turned elder fraud into a business model. Dorothy Miller died without knowing she'd been robbed. 4 other victims suffered similar fates. The total financial damage exceeds $1.6 million. The emotional damage is incalculable." The sentences came down like hammer blows. Lisa: 12 years in federal prison. Jason: 15 years. Joint fine of $2.5 million. Forfeiture of all assets. Lisa collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Jason's face went white as chalk, his hands gripping the table like it was the only thing holding him up. But I wasn't done. As the court prepared to adjourn, Catherine Peterson stood. "Your Honor, my client, Harold Morgan, wishes to file a civil suit against the defendants for emotional distress, medical damages, and what we believe amounts to attempted murder through induced medical trauma." Marcus Wayne shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's absurd. There's no evidence." "There's evidence that my client suffered a near-fatal heart attack," Catherine said calmly. "There's evidence that the stress of discovering his daughter's betrayal, the manipulation, the fraud, all contributed to his medical crisis. We're seeking $5 million in damages." Judge Morrison looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Morgan, you understand this is separate from the criminal case?" I stood. "I understand, Your Honor. I also understand that these defendants have caused harm that extends far beyond what criminal sentences can address. I want every asset they have or ever will have to go toward compensating their victims, starting with Dorothy Miller's family." The civil suit was approved. The trial date was set. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. I ignored them all, walking to Catherine's car with Robert at my side. "Dad," Robert said quietly once we were inside, "Jason's parents are going to lose everything. The $1 million bail is being forfeited to victim restitution. Their house, their retirement savings, it's all gone." "They raised a son who preys on the elderly," I said. "Actions have consequences. That's a lesson they should have taught him years ago." Catherine drove us back to my house on Royal Street. The maple tree was in full bloom now, the street quiet in the late afternoon sun. My home, still mine, forever mine. Inside I poured 3 glasses of water, and we sat in my study going over the details. The criminal case was complete, but the civil suit would take months. Catherine was already preparing depositions, asset searches, insurance claims. We'll get maybe $3.2 million out of this, she estimated, between their insurance policies, forfeited bail money, and seized assets. Not the full $5 million, but significant. I want specific distributions, I said. $1 million to Dorothy Miller's family. The rest split between the other victims and a fund for elderly fraud prevention. Catherine made notes. And you? I keep my house, my pension, my dignity. That's enough. After they left, I sat alone in my study as the sun set over Alexandria. Lisa was going to federal prison for 12 years, Jason for 15. Their lives were effectively over, their reputations destroyed, their freedom gone. I should have felt triumph, victory, justice served. Instead, I felt empty. Not regret exactly, not guilt. Just the hollow acknowledgement that this was how it had to end, that the little girl who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers was truly gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. My phone rang. Robert, Dad, I just got word. Jason tried to file an appeal. Claims ineffective counsel, procedural errors. It won't go anywhere, but he's trying. Let him try, I said. He'll fail. They always do. And Lisa? I closed my eyes. What about her? She's asking to see you. Through her lawyer. Says she wants to apologize, to explain. No. Dad. No, I repeated firmer. She had her chance to explain. She could have come to me when she first got in trouble with Romano. She could have asked for help instead of forging my signature. She could have told the truth in that hospital room instead of lying to my face. I paused. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. Understood. I'll let her lawyer know. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. The house settled around me, familiar creaks and sighs, the sound of home. Tomorrow I would water my orchids, play chess online, read legal journals, continue my life, the life Lisa had tried to steal. But tonight I sat in the silence and acknowledged the truth. I'd won. I'd destroyed my daughter's life as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Justice had been served, and it tasted like ash. A month passed before I made the decision to visit Lisa. I'd refused her initial requests, ignored the letters her lawyer sent, deleted the voicemails she managed to leave through the prison phone system. But something gnawed at me. Not guilt, not regret, more like the need for closure. To look my daughter in the eye one final time and say what needed to be said. The drive to Alderson Federal Prison Camp in West Virginia took 4 hours. Robert offered to come with me, but I refused. This was something I needed to do alone. The prison sat in the mountains, surrounded by rolling hills that would have been beautiful in any other context. Here they just felt like walls. I parked in the visitor lot, went through security, submitted to searches and metal detectors, and finally was led to the visitation room. It was nothing like the movies. No phones and glass barriers. Just a large room with tables and chairs, guards stationed at intervals, other inmates visiting with family members. The fluorescent lights were harsh, washing out everything to pale institutional colors. And then I saw Lisa. I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, perhaps 20 pounds, and it showed in her face. Hollowed cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. She wore prison khakis. No makeup, no jewelry. The polished facade I'd seen in court was completely gone. When she saw me, her face crumpled. Tears started immediately, streaming down her face as she stood on shaking legs. "Dad," she whispered, "you came." I sat down at the designated table. Didn't reach for her hand. Didn't offer comfort. Just waited. She sat across from me, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, trying to compose herself, failing. "I'm so sorry," she began, words tumbling out in a rush. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was desperate. The debts, Romano's threats. I was terrified. I thought if I could just get the money, I could fix everything, and you'd never have to know, and—" "Stop," I said quietly. She stopped, mouth open, eyes wide. "You were desperate," I said. "You were terrified. You were in trouble. All of that may be true. But you had options, Lisa. You could have come to me." I was ashamed. Shame doesn't excuse betrayal. I leaned forward slightly. I'm a federal judge with 30 years of experience. I have connections, knowledge, resources. If you'd come to me when you first got into trouble with Romano, I could have helped you. Legal channels, bankruptcy protection, witness protection if necessary. We could have found a solution. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. I know that now, but You thought I was an easy mark, I interrupted. You thought your father, recovering from heart surgery, confused and vulnerable, would be simple to manipulate. You saw an opportunity, not a parent. That's not. She was crying harder now. I love you, Dad. I never wanted to hurt you. And yet you did. I kept my voice level, clinical. You forged my signature. You sold my home without my knowledge or consent. You planned to warehouse me in a nursing facility while you fled the country with my money. You looked me in the eye in that hospital room and lied directly to my face. Each sentence landed like a blow. She flinched with every word. Do you know what the worst part is? I asked. Not the fraud, not the betrayal. The fact that you learned nothing from how I raised you. I taught you right from wrong. I taught you that actions have consequences. I taught you the value of honesty and integrity. And you took all of those lessons and threw them away the moment they became inconvenient. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Please, Dad, I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. When I get out, I'll make it right. Lisa. I said her name with such finality that she fell silent. You're not getting out for 12 years. And when you do, I'll be 80 years old, maybe dead. And even if I'm not, there's nothing to make right. You destroyed our relationship the moment you decided I was worth more to you as a victim than as a father. She stared at me, tears still streaming, but something in her expression shifted. Horror, understanding, the realization that this was truly the end. I came here to tell you something, I continued, not because you deserve to hear it, but because I need to say it. I'm not doing this out of cruelty or revenge. I'm doing this because it's what's right. You committed crimes, serious crimes, against me and against other vulnerable people who trusted you. Dorothy Miller died without knowing her own daughter's husband had robbed her. 4 other families suffered because of you and Jason. I stood preparing to leave. The justice system exists for moments like this, to hold people accountable when they hurt others. That includes my own daughter, maybe especially my own daughter, because if I can't stand by my own principles when they're hardest to maintain, then what were they worth? Dad, please. She reached across the table, but I stepped back. You have 12 years, Lisa. Use them to become someone better. Or don't. That's your choice now. But understand this. The woman who sat by my hospital bed and smiled while telling me she'd sold my house. She's not my daughter anymore. My daughter died the day you decided to betray me. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard her crying, calling my name, but I didn't look back. The guard opened the door, and I walked through it without hesitation. The drive home was silent. 4 hours of mountain roads and fading daylight, my mind replaying the conversation. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the cold certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. Justice doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care if it hurts. It simply is. And sometimes, serving justice means watching your own daughter break. 4 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I sat on my porch tending my orchids. The ones on the east side needed more water. The purple phalaenopsis was finally blooming after months of careful cultivation. Small victories, peaceful moments. The civil suit had concluded the week before. The final settlement came to $3,200,000, extracted from Jason and Lisa's insurance policies, seized assets, and the forfeited bail money. Catherine Peterson had orchestrated the whole thing with ruthless efficiency. I'd already distributed the money according to my plan. $1 million to a fund supporting victims of elder financial fraud. $1 million into an irrevocable trust for Robert's children's education. My grandchildren would have opportunities Lisa had squandered. $500,000 split among Dorothy Miller's family and the other victims Jason had defrauded over the years. $700,000 I kept for myself, a comfortable buffer for my retirement years. My house on Royal Street was mine again, completely and legally. I'd updated all the documentation, created an airtight living trust that would pass everything to Robert upon my death, bypassing Lisa entirely. She would inherit Nothing. Not the house, not my pension, not a single piece of my carefully maintained legal document collection. The sound of a car pulling up made me look toward the street. Robert's SUV, with Sarah in the passenger seat and my 2 grandchildren bouncing in the back. They spilled out of the vehicle like puppies, all energy and laughter. "Grandpa," the youngest, Tommy, ran up the porch steps. "Mom says we're having dinner here." "That's right," I said, catching him in a hug. "How was school?" Over dinner, we talked about normal things. Tommy's soccer team, Emily's upcoming piano recital, Sarah's new job at the accounting firm. Robert carved the roast while I poured drinks, and for a while, it was almost possible to forget the past months. Almost. After the children went to play in the yard, Robert and Sarah and I sat on the porch with coffee. The sun was setting over Alexandria, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Dad," Robert said carefully, "I got an update from the prison. Lisa's been asking about you again. I'm not interested." "I know, I told them that." He paused. "Jason's appeal was denied. He tried to claim prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective counsel, procedural errors. Judge Morrison shot it all down. He's done." "Good." I sipped my coffee. "And his parents?" "Lost their house. It was sold to satisfy the victim restitution fund. They're living in a rental now, both working part-time despite being in their 70s. Their retirement is gone." I felt Sarah watching me, gauging my reaction. She was kind-hearted, always had been. Probably thought I should feel guilty about that. I didn't. "They raised a predator," I said simply. If they'd taught Jason the difference between right and wrong, none of this would have happened. Now they're learning that enabling criminals has consequences, even when the criminal is your son. Robert nodded slowly. "The other victims have been paid out. Dorothy Miller's children used their portion to set up a scholarship in her name. Said it's what she would have wanted." Something about that struck me. Dorothy Miller, who died without knowing she'd been robbed, now had her name on a scholarship helping students, a legacy built from the ashes of betrayal. "That's good," I said quietly. "That's right." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the grandchildren play. Tommy was showing Emily how to throw a football, both of them laughing when it went wildly off course. "Dad," Robert said finally, "can I ask you something?" "You just did?" He smiled slightly. "How do you feel about all this?" "Really? Lisa's your daughter. I know this can't be easy." I thought about that question, considered all the possible answers. The easy ones, the complicated ones, the honest ones. "You know what I learned in 30 years on the bench?" I said. "Justice isn't about feelings. It's not about what's easy or comfortable, or even what feels right in your heart. It's about what's true and what's fair and what serves the greater good." I watched my grandchildren playing, so innocent, so untouched by the darkness their aunt had brought into our lives. I saw the worst in people for 3 decades. The liars, the thieves, the manipulators. I sentenced hundreds of them. Sent them to prison, took away their freedom, destroyed their lives in service of justice. And I never regretted it because it was necessary. Because society only functions when people face consequences for their actions. I turned to Robert. "Lisa committed serious crimes. She hurt people, destroyed lives, preyed on the vulnerable. She happens to be my daughter, but that doesn't change what she did. If anything, it makes it worse, because I taught her better. And if I can't stand by my own principles when they cost me something personal, then what were those principles worth?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "That's incredibly hard, Harold." "Yes," I agreed. "It is. But the right thing usually is." Robert reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You did what you had to do. Mom would have been proud." I closed my eyes, thinking of Mary. She'd believed in justice, too, in consequences and accountability. She'd have hated what Lisa became, but she'd have understood what I did about it. "The important thing," I said, opening my eyes and looking at my grandchildren, "is that we protected the future. Tommy and Emily will grow up knowing that actions have consequences, that you can't hurt people and expect to get away with it. That family means something, but it doesn't mean enabling criminal behavior." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Alexandria in twilight. My house stood solid behind me, my home of nearly 40 years. My orchids thrived in their carefully maintained environment. My chess trophies gleamed on the mantel inside. My legal documents were properly organized, my affairs in perfect order. Lisa was in prison for 12 years, Jason for 15. Victor Romano was serving 20 for racketeering. The elder fraud victims had been compensated. Dorothy Miller had a scholarship in her name. My grandchildren had education funds that would give them opportunities. Justice had been served. The law had worked exactly as it should. And me? I was right here, in my home, with my son and his family, watching the sunset over a city I'd protected for 3 decades from my bench. I'd won. Completely. Totally. Absolutely. So why did it still taste like ash? Maybe because victory over your own daughter isn't supposed to taste sweet. Maybe because justice, when applied to family, leaves scars that never quite heal. Or maybe because I'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that principles have a price, and sometimes that price is everything you thought you couldn't bear to lose. But I'd paid it anyway, because I was Harold Morgan, federal judge, retired, and for 30 years I'd believed that justice was blind, impartial, and absolute, even when it broke my heart to prove it. The children's laughter echoed across the yard, and I smiled. Tomorrow I'd play chess online, tend my orchids, maybe drive to Richmond for another tournament. Life would go on. It always does. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.